But and I was talking last night about how I have in-depth chemistry with certain people. Lenny's Green being one of them. Call her Ma. Nobody else out here call Ma. Word. And that's been an ongoing thing for what? How long you been my virtual Ma? 4 years. Sounds about right to me. I got my sister, got my brothers. It's cool. Went to sleep too damn early. Yeah, I started around midnight too. You overworked yourself yesterday, baby, for today. I apologize. I apologize. I had a lot of energy. I had a lot of energy to go. That my bad. Hey, next time, you know what I mean? Try not to show up 6 minutes before the door is closing, and I won't keep the door open another 3 hours due to politics. You know what I mean? I kept the door open and rolled and vibed because the vibes was good. And it's the end of the week. And that was enough for me. I also additionally had the time for it, so. Mm. Travis Prince, the Prince, the artiste. So, literally, 7 day countdown. I got you. Oh, with the germ, I hope you've had many thoughts because it's going down. It's going down. You know, we have to take care of business before pleasure. Yeah. Oh, good afternoon. Good afternoon. Oh, you cut some grass. Okay, okay. Hit the shoulders and the quads. You out there like you was doing chores in 16 again and shit. Everybody Cosby freezing, yeah. Yeah. Beep, beep. So that's kind of bad for you a bit. As to, you know what I mean, because of what you do. I noticed, you know, you. Oh, hey, okay. But say I text something, like, okay, you might check and then go back. And then I might have just walked in the room, text something. You don't go back for a while, like, because you be paying. And I respect that. No shit. May I suggest putting the, you know what I mean? Slide your device towards the canvas, you know, the bottom left or right of the canvas there, so that it catches in the peripheral. What's that? Oh, hey. Oh, we're gonna be waiting there with 6 feet social distancing and shit next in line for a response and whatnot. And now that they messed up, streamers got to be on their job. I come through, I pass through, make sure that, you know, nothing need to clean up. Your stream is like I've ever moderated, and I appreciate that. You don't have any problems, I think. Yeah. You did. I've seen before. You know, that's why I was glad to accept it. No problem. I'll get that. Actions and shit. But yes, everybody's comments been freezing. It's another one of those waves we all going through. I find it odd that through all of this, one way or another, whether it's the company's fault or outside influences, other, you know, DDoS and whatever, reporting, whatever, people have such a problem with people socializing. But I assume strongly, ever since they found those terrorists using Playroom to communicate amongst each other, to plot their attack, I think they've felt away ever since that. I don't know if any of you knew about that. The attacks on Paris were planned on Playroom. It's planned on him. Within the Arabic community. They were using PlayStation Network to organize something. Right? So, I don't know. Comments messed up, communications messed up. Maybe it's an effort to keep those that would use it in a really bad way off. I don't know. But I'm always appreciative to see a username or someone I know and have conversation. Works for me. I don't like to take things too far out of their meaning, you know, or intent. This is intended for us to socialize, shall we? And
what up? I'm watching my homeboy Blunt movie.
Side note, I'm thinking a neon, glow in the dark.
This nigga, they stream in black and white.
With some blues, the way my scorpions glow. Let me show you. Exact hue. Alright. Oh man, I'm in the. Hold on. I got a better way. Cut the commercial. Advanced settings. Turn that camera on. There we go. Save ourselves some button pushing.
I don't know which stream is. But I got it on my phone and my laptop, but they're not going at the same rate. I don't know which one is.
And then the blue, right? The blue is the same, the glow, but a turquoise.
I think the one on my phone is actually colors faster than this one on the laptop.
That's jackpot in there. See the color that she reflects? Like that. That's the best I could get it. See, she goes a fluorescent green, but they also go fluorescent blue. That's jackpot sitting in there. Like, I gotta keep this up here, this machete covering, so she feels like she's in a cave, because otherwise that's where you see all that, and she strikes her own reflection. I don't really want her damaging her stinger. But yeah. Green, blue, gray, white, and the Jordan. Like the Jordan, just to simplify shit. Everything you did, I just don't know if I wanted different colors. We need days. It's countdown, sir. I might hit you. I just would go good with that. I don't know. I got that Jordan look on the Gore-Tex. But like, okay. COVID-19 on it, but like some syringes for the vaccine. The syringes will be blue. The germ and the vaccine, the cure, you know, whatever. Vaccine. Yeah, I think I just want like the back half, you know, whatever. Not too much work, yeah. And I think I just want like the back half. I haven't decided that. We going there. I don't know. I haven't decided that. But we going there. I don't know. I haven't decided.
Boozy, what up, bro?
Right?
Let's fucking with Blunt Mover in this stream for a minute.
Trust me. You ain't the only artiste around here, sir. But you are the artiste.
You here?
For sure. Without question.
We're gonna start working on these books. Working on the background a little bit, guys. I ain't gonna lie, yo.
Cause I've been thinking, do I want to make them so I can? Do I want to make them and just have them? Like
some of the books in the background are really out of focus, and I can't read the titles. I don't know how I'm gonna fudge some of these titles on these books, or what I'm gonna do with it to keep it.
Hold on the waves.
Like.
First joints there, you know what I mean?
Whatever. It's my fucking painting. The books don't have to be exactly the same books that were on the shelf. It was just a random book section at the book. I'm definitely gonna have to like improvise on some of the book titles.
What she do? She chilling. She's still sleeping. She don't even care. But it'd been crazy if she'd came running out on security detail and whatnot. Good look, right? Where that light at? I'm just not that shit. There you go. So look, she there. Oh, she moved. No, there she go. You see her? She behind the knife. You see it, Green? That's Venom, and that's Carnage right here. Right there, up top. And I just fed him, actually. This one's a male. He's eating. Can't see him. He's done with the meal, too. He's done with the meal. He ate one of the worms. What the fuck is it? Hold on, I'll get your comment in a second. Yeah, he ate one of these. See him on the front. Mature-sized worm. But yeah, I want to get the glow-in-the-dark joints. You know what I mean? I'm all about that glow-in-the-dark shit. I like that. The fluorescence. Yeah.
Some glow-in-the-dark shit be hot.
And I forgot to, I told real quick too, before I catch up with you. Spoke to the youngin, Force. I didn't get the workstation. That didn't work out for me. Nah, they were a little too pricey for what they were asking. They over there price gouging shit and whatnot because they know people need and want. So they've raised the price on shit that would normally be $100 is now $300, and I'm just not on board for that. So we had to skip on that little workout program deal. But all I'm saying, I've been keeping my regimen. I've been keeping my regimen of workout. About to paint for a little while. Hit me up if you get on Call of Duty or Ghost Recon for sure. Yeah, Ghost Recon. We got a new download on that too. I saw something on that. I gotta check that. And I got something like 30 days. 30 days left.
They got some new shit on Ghost Recon. I'm gonna have to check that shit too then, because I didn't know that. I've been playing that Call of Duty a lot lately. Call of Duty been... I ain't gonna lie, guys, yo. Call of Duty been owning my life lately, yo. You know, I ain't ashamed to admit it. I ain't ashamed to say I got a gamer addiction. I've been gaming my whole life though, man. I've been doing this shit forever. And then I know, like, when I get new games that I like, bro, that shit just... yo, for the past couple of days, yo, Call of Duty. That's all I've been doing, yo. I mean, that's all, yo. I be trying to watch TV sometimes, but while I'm watching TV, I be thinking about playing the fucking game. When I'm painting, I be thinking about playing the game. Like, shit. But, whatever. It's just a game.
Are you over 25? Have a clean driving record? No DUIs? You can drop your auto insurance rate to as low as $19 a month.
The following is a conversation with Richard Dawkins.
Whatever. Yeah, but Call of Duty is where it's at. When I get out of here, I'll probably go downstairs and play Call of Duty. Like I say, Blunt Move say he probably want to get on that Ghost Recon. I'll play that shit too, yo. Ghost Recon fun as hell too, yo. When that shit first came, the first one on my life, Wildlands, oh my god, yo, that game is so fun, yo. Just the story mode, the co-op mode, it's so fun. You don't even really need the PvP. But the PvP on that game is fucking excellent. That shit is excellent. It's a solid ass fucking game. I have my issues with Ghost Recon, Breakpoint. It's still a pretty good game. I'm not as into it as I was the first one with the Sicario and South America. That shit was crazy. But the new Call of Duty, yo, that shit is the wave, yo. And it seems like every game has to have a battle royale. And so haven't bought a Call of Duty for a while. I think I don't even know, yo. It's been a long time. I think I had like one of the Call of Duties, probably about almost 10 years ago, some shit like that, yo. 8 years ago, or whatever. But from my understanding, the last installment of Call of Duty, it didn't have a campaign mode to it. It just had the battle royale. I don't know. And a lot of people didn't like it because Call of Duty is known for its story mode and it gives a really, really good cinematics and stuff like that. They've had fucking what's the one actor? He played in House of Cards and a bunch of other stuff. Kevin Spacey. I mean, they had Kevin Spacey in their story. They've had Angela Bassett. They've had like major actors in the Call of Duty stories. You know what I'm saying? In the campaign. So for the last installment, not to have a campaign, a lot of the hardcore, players didn't really jive with that shit. But this installment came back with a campaign. They brought the Battle Royale back, and they actually gave the Battle Royale away for free, like a lot of other studios are doing, similar to Apex Legends. What studio does that? It's a pretty big studio who does Apex, because that's the same company that does Titanfall. Whatever it is, I can't think of the name of the company right now. But anyway, like, so a lot of these studios, these gaming studios, are giving away their battle royales for free with a pay to play system for upgrades and cosmetics and stuff like that, so they can earn cash off of it that way. But so Call of Duty fell in line with it and gave it away for free. So I downloaded the free battle royale, Warzone. That shit is fun as hell, just because the map is so big, the weapons are cool. And so I wound up buying the whole game, and I said I've been playing that shit forever. On Warzone, yo, do it now, bro. Send me a Are we friends on PlayStation Network? Send me a friend request. If we're not friends, send me a friend request with a message so I know it's you. I ain't gonna lie, I got like 430 pending friend requests, but I got like over 500 friends on PlayStation Network, because with the new system you can have like 1,000 friends now. But I got like over 500 friends, and I play video games with like 15 or 20 people, maybe tops. Like my hardcore squad buddies that I play with, it's like 6 of us. And sometimes we all don't play the same games. Like, I got some buddies from Battlefield and from Ghost Recon who love Call of Duty. So the last Call of Duty and this Call of Duty, they've been on it for a while, and I wasn't playing Call of Duty, so I was playing other games. So sometimes we don't always play the same games, but when there's games, especially shooters, good shooters come out, like, I only play games with like a few people, yo. And so I don't really accept as many friend requests anymore, because, like, okay, I understand, like, people like my art, they like my stream and my commentary. That's fucking awesome. You can just follow me and subscribe to the YouTube channel. Don't send me like a friend request on PlayStation. I just got a friend request from 007, the Prophet. But, like, don't send me a friend request if you're not gonna play games with me. Like, that's the whole thing of having friends on the PlayStation Network. If you look at, you can go to my profile and look at what games I play, and they're mostly like shooter, like the 2-player game are shooter games. That's what most online games are. It's fucking shooter looter games. I do like playing a lot of like single player games, like the Assassin's Creed series. They even like added co-op and all this other shit in there, but I seen the preview for the Viking shit. That shit might be hot, yo. I might get the Assassin's Creed again. Shit like The Last of Us. You know what I'm saying? Not sure if they're gonna try to add co-op or fuck that shit up some kind of way like that. But it's like standalone single player games where you play by yourself. I love shit like that. But like the shooters, I'm a big Battlefield player. Haven't had the last. Didn't get Battlefield 5 just because whatever. But right now I'm playing Call of Duty. I'll still play Apex Legends if people want to. Titanfall, still like playing that. And Ghost Recon, Breakpoint, or Wildlands. I'll still play Wildlands. And like a lot of people just don't, I don't know, play games, yeah. Warzone, not Warfare. Yo, that Valhalla, I'm telling you, yo, looks good, yo. This shit is looking good. Shit is looking good. And there is this one movie, and the name of it is Valhalla. Check that shit out, yo. If y'all have some time, try to find this movie called Valhalla. I forgot the actor's name in it. Um, oh, it's called Valhalla Rising was the name of the film. Valhalla Rising came out in 2009. Uh, it was a Danish produced film. Yo, for like almost the first half of the movie, there's very, very, very little dialogue in this movie at all, yo. This shit is so fucking weird. But it's so like it's intense and it's hard to explain, yo. It's one of those fucking movies like I would honestly if motherfuckers still bought DVDs and shit, I would have this in my collection. I might actually watch this shit again tonight. I've watched it like 3 times already. Um but Valhalla Rising. If you've never seen this shit, and this is what the cover of it looks like, it's just this dude standing like in front of some mountains or something, yo. I forgot the actor's name. He's been in a lot of other stuff. Really good actor, but if you haven't seen that shit, yo, watch it. Watch this movie and tell me you don't like that shit, yo. Come back and tell me you don't like that shit. You're gonna have to tell me why. It's just one of those weird ass movies. It's like, you know the movies. You watch it for 10 minutes. You be like, man, fuck this shit. I'm about to turn this shit off. And then somebody say, give it 10 more minutes. And then 10 more minutes, you be like, yo, this shit is still fucking. Oh, wait a minute. Oh, it's slow. I mean, like, that shit slow as fuck. But for some reason, like, after a while, you just like, I want to see how this shit ends, yo. That shit was good as fuck, yo. Valhalla Rising. Vikings, the TV series. I watched some of that because my homeboy was really into that shit, yo. My homeboy was telling me about that Viking shit, yo. And so I did watch some of it. I don't know, man. Once again, this is just my biases and my prejudices. It's not being racist. It's just my own personal preferences, yo. Like, I like seeing black people, you know? And there are some shows with little to no black people in it that are really good, and I'll still watch them. You know, they're really good shows. But sometimes it's just like, you know, like shit like the Vikings, it's just like all white people. You know, but then white people, when there's like all black shit, white people like, oh, it's so black. Why are there any white people in it? It's so racist. There's no white people at all. And it's like, why are you mad at that? Like, you have so many fucking shows and movies where there are no black people. And that's the one thing. Like, a lot of shows do turn me off like that. I want to say I don't like that about myself, but I honestly don't feel like there's anything wrong with that, personally. I be thinking about that shit all the time, and like somebody actually like try to call me on that shit, like somebody close to me who I care about, and it's like they're like, well, you don't want to watch the show I like because there's no black people in it, blah, 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 blah. And it's like, I can't. I don't know. I don't know what to tell you. It's just, it is what it is. You know. Yeah, the door do need to swing both ways. And so, once again, Breaking Bad is an excellent show. I watched every episode of Breaking Bad. And they did have, like, some Latinos and some you know, black people in there. But it was mostly white people. But it was a really good show. Really good show still. And I don't know. Like, I'm not gonna watch like The Big Bang Theory or Friends or shit like that. Back in the day, I used to love Frasier. Frasier was a good ass show, yo. Used to love that shit, yo. and there are just like some shows that I will watch that, you know, I don't. It doesn't have to have black people in it, and it's still good. Tons of movies like that. Like one of my favorite movies, yo. No Country for Old Men. You ever seen that shit, yo? No Country for Old Men? Yo, that shit is good as fuck, son. That's a good ass fucking movie. There's no black people in it. Quentin Tarantino. What was that shit? Inglourious Bastards. I mean, there's like endless numbers of things like that. But like sometimes it's just like Vikings. I know about the history of the Vikings, and you know, apparently they were, you know, down in the regions of North America at the Canadian border, maybe even all the way far as like Maine, and you know, they sailed and they were explorers, and yeah, great, you know. Do I want to watch a whole series on them though? Like, nah. But that game though, yo, that Assassin's Creed, yo. Boy, that shit look hot as fuck. I might play that shit now. I ain't gonna lie. Bruh, that shit look hella good. I had to watch the preview twice. Wait a minute. On the battlefield where you thought that motherfucker about to die, I'm like, oh, the assassin gonna come and save him or something about to save him. Oh, that dude, the assassin. Oh my God. I should have known. He's the fucking assassin. Everybody's looking like what? I gotta watch that preview again. Oh yeah, Troy. I watched Troy when that shit first came out, yo. Hector! This motherfucker, yo, come out here and fight me, bro. Brought a fucking giant out. Look, we gonna settle this. You bring your best soldier against our best soldier. This motherfucker sleep somewhere. Yo, Achilles, they need you out there. Oh, I'm coming. Fucking giant. One blow. We done? We done here? I'm done. You know what I'm saying? Motherfucker snuck into the camp. The old head snuck into the camp. He's like, how the fuck you get in here? Like, bitch, this is my homeland. I know these lands better than all your fucking soldiers. I can walk wherever the fuck I want to. Just look, man, give me my son's body back, yo. Please. Drug that motherfucker behind a horse, yo. This shit crazy, yo. Achilles. That shit had, Angelina Jolie was in that shit. Was his mom, yo. Yeah. Yo, this shit look too good, yo. Y'all playing, man. Alright, I can't watch that shit right now, yo. That shit too good, yo. I'm gonna have to watch that shit later. Yeah, Boozy, you do that. Clive Owens, really, really good actor, yo. Shoot 'em up. The Inside Man. The International. Derailed. Children of Men. I don't know a lot of actors who I can name movies like that off of, yo, but I fuck with Clive Owens, yo. I never seen The King Arthur with Clive Owens in it, though. I might have to check that one out. Cause Clive Owens is pretty dope, yo. He's a damn good actor. And he's one of those actors I've never heard any kind of shit about, like, all that negative publicity. Like Christian Bale, when he cursed somebody out on set, or you know how actors and famous rich people get sometimes all bougie and Hasidity and treat regular people like we ain't shit. Never heard anything like that about Clive Owens. But motherfucking Keanu Reeves the fucking man though. Like, everybody always praises Keanu for just staying humble, just being a regular dude. You know what I'm saying? No matter, like, all the fame. This motherfucker is Bill and fucking Neo. Like, and he just like a chill ass motherfucker. Yo. Anybody who meets him, like, yo, fucking Keanu Reeves is awesome, yo.
An evolutionary biologist, and author of The Selfish Gene, The Blind Watchmaker, The God Delusion, magic of reality, and the greatest show of Earth, and his latest, Outgrowing God. He is the originator and popularizer of a lot of fascinating ideas in evolutionary biology and science in general, including, funny enough, the introduction of the word meme in his 1976 book, The Selfish Gene, which, in the context of a gene-centered view of evolution, is an exceptionally powerful idea. He's outspoken, bold, and often fearless in the defense of science and reason, and in this way is one of the most influential thinkers of our time. This conversation was recorded before the outbreak of the pandemic. For everyone feeling the medical, psychological, and financial burden of this crisis, I'm sending love your way. Stay strong. We're in this together. We'll beat this thing. This is the Artificial Intelligence Podcast. If you enjoy it, subscribe on YouTube, review it with 5 stars on Apple Podcasts, support it on Patreon, or simply connect with me on Twitter at Lex Friedman, spelled Fridman. As usual, I'll do a few minutes of ads now and never any ads in the middle that can break the flow of the conversation. I hope that works for you and doesn't hurt the listening experience. This show is presented by Cash App, the #1 finance app in the App Store. When you get it, use code LEXPODCAST. Cash App lets you send money to friends, buy Bitcoin, and invest in the stock market with as little as $1. Since Cash App allows you to send and receive money digitally, peer-to-peer, security in all digital transactions is very important. Let me mention the PCI data security standard that Cash App is compliant with. I'm a big fan of standards for safety and security. PCI DSS is a good example of that, where a bunch of competitors got together and agreed that there needs to be a global standard around the security of transactions. Now we just need to do the same for autonomous vehicles and artificial intelligence systems in general. So again, if you get Cash App from the App Store or Google Play and use the code LEXPODCAST, you get $10, and Cash App will also donate $10 to FIRST, an organization that is helping to advance robotics and STEM education for young people around the world. And now, here's my conversation with Richard Dawkins. Do you think there's intelligent life out there in the universe?
Well, if we accept that there's intelligent life here, and we accept that the number of planets in the universe is gigantic, 10 to the 22 stars has been estimated, it seems to me highly likely that there is not only life in the universe elsewhere, but also intelligent life. If you deny that, then you're committed to the view that the things that happened on this planet are staggeringly improbable. Ludicrously, off the charts improbable. And I don't think it's that improbable. Certainly the origin of life itself, there are really 2 steps: the origin of life, which is probably fairly improbable, and then the subsequent evolution to intelligent life, which is also fairly improbable. So the juxtaposition of those 2, you could say, is pretty improbable, but not 10 to the 22 improbable. It's an interesting question, maybe you're coming on to it. Encountered it. The most likely way we would come across them would be by radio. Highly unlikely they'd ever visit us. But it's not that unlikely that we would pick up radio signals. And then we would have to have some means of deciding that it was intelligent. People involved in the SETI program discuss how they would do it, and things like prime numbers would be an obvious thing to, an obvious way for them to broadcast, to say, we are intelligent, we are here. I suspect it probably would be obvious, actually.
Oh, it's interesting, prime numbers, so the mathematical patterns. It's an open question whether mathematics is the same for us as it would be for aliens. I suppose we could assume that ultimately, if we're governed by the same laws of physics, then we should be governed by the same laws of mathematics.
I think so. I suspect that they will have Pythagoras' theorem, etc. I don't think their mathematics will be that different.
Do you think evolution would also be a force on the alien planets as well?
I've stuck my neck out and said that if ever we do discover life elsewhere, it will be Darwinian life, in the sense that it will work by some kind of natural selection, the non-random survival of randomly generated codes. It doesn't mean that it would have to have some kind of genetics, but it doesn't have to be DNA genetics. Probably wouldn't be, actually, but I think it would have to be Darwinian, yes.
So some kind of selection process.
Yes, in the general sense, it would be Darwinian.
So let me ask kind of an artificial intelligence engineering question. So you've been an outspoken critic of, I guess, what could be called intelligent design, which is an attempt to describe the creation of a human mind and body by some religious folks. Religious folks used to describe. So, broadly speaking, evolution is, as far as I know, again, you can correct me, is the only scientific theory we have for the development.
Yo, Boozy, told you, bro.
Like, there's no alternative theory as far as.
Told you, bro.
None has ever been suggested, and I suspect it never will be.
Well, of course, whenever somebody says that, 100 years later.
I know. It's a risk.
It's a risk.
But what a bet. I mean, I
But it would look, it would probably look very similar, but it's almost like Einstein's general relativity versus Newtonian physics. It would be maybe an alteration of the theory or something like that, but it won't be fundamentally different. But okay, so now for the past 70 years, even before, the AI community has been trying to engineer intelligence, in a sense, to do what intelligent design says, was done here on Earth. What's your intuition? Do you think it's possible to build intelligence, to build computers that are intelligent, or do we need to do something like the evolutionary process? Like there's no shortcuts here.
That's an interesting question.
That really
I'm committed to the belief that it's ultimately possible, because I think there's nothing non-physical in our brains. I think our brains work by the laws of physics, and so it must in principle be possible to replicate that. In practice, though, it might be very difficult, and as you suggest, it may be the only way to do it is by something like an evolutionary process. I'd be surprised. I suspect that it will come, but it's certainly been slower in coming than some of the early pioneers thought.
I thought it would be, yeah. But in your sense, is the evolutionary process efficient? So you can see it as exceptionally wasteful in one perspective, but at the same time, maybe that is the only path.
It's a paradox, isn't it? I mean, on the one side, it is deplorably wasteful.
Yeah.
It's fundamentally based on waste. On the other hand, it does produce magnificent results. When the design of a soaring bird, an albatross, a vulture, an eagle, is superb. An engineer would be proud to have done it. On the other hand, an engineer would not be proud to have done some of the other things that evolution has served up. Some of the sort of botched jobs that you can easily understand because of their historical origins, but they don't look well designed.
Do you have examples of bad design?
My favourite example is the recurrent laryngeal nerve. I've used this many times. This is a nerve, it's one of the cranial nerves. It goes from the brain, and the end organ that it supplies is the voice box, the larynx. But it doesn't go straight to the larynx, it goes right down into the chest, and then loops round an artery in the chest, and then comes straight back up again to the larynx. And I've assisted in the dissection of a giraffe's neck, which happened to have died in a zoo. And we saw the recurrent laryngeal nerve going whizzing straight past the larynx, within an inch of the larynx, down into the chest, and then back up again, which is a detour of many feet. Very, very inefficient. The reason is historical. The ancestors, our fish ancestors, the ancestors of all mammals and fish, the most direct pathway of the equivalent of that nerve, there wasn't a larynx in those days, but it innervated part of the gills. The most direct pathway was behind that artery. And then when the tetrapods, when the land vertebrates started evolving, and then the neck started to stretch, the marginal cost of changing the embryological design to jump that nerve over the artery was too great, or rather was each step of the way was a very small cost, but the cost of actually jumping it over would have been very large. As the neck lengthened, it was a negligible change, just increased the length of the detour a tiny bit, each millimetre at a time, didn't make any difference. And so, but finally, when you get to a giraffe, it's a huge detour, and no doubt is very inefficient. Now that's bad design. Any engineer would reject that piece of design. It's ridiculous. Examples, as you'd expect. It's not surprising that we find examples of that sort. In a way, what's surprising is there aren't more of them. In a way, what's surprising is that the design of living things is so good. So natural selection manages to achieve excellent results, partly by tinkering, partly by coming along and cleaning up initial mistakes and as it were, making the best of a bad job.
That's really interesting. I mean, it is surprising and beautiful, and it's a mystery from an engineering perspective that so many things are well designed. I suppose the thing we're forgetting is how many generations have to die.
Oh yeah,
for that.
That's the inefficiency of it. Yes, that's the horrible wastefulness of it.
So yeah, we marvel at the final product, but the process is painful. Elon Musk describes human beings as potentially what he calls the biological bootloader for artificial intelligence, or artificial general intelligence is used as the term. It's kind of like super intelligence. Do you see superhuman level intelligence as potentially the next step in the evolutionary process?
Yes, I think that if superhuman intelligence is to be found, it will be artificial. I don't have any hope that we ourselves, our brains will go on getting larger in ordinary biological evolution. I think that's probably come to an end. It is the dominant trend, or one of the dominant trends in our fossil history for the last 2 or 3 million years.
Brain size?
Brain size, yes. So it's been swelling rather dramatically over the last 2 or 3 million years. That is unlikely to continue. The only way that happens is because natural selection favors those individuals with the biggest brains, and that's not happening anymore.
Right. So in general, in humans, the selection pressures are not active. I mean, are they active in any form?
Well, in order for them to be active, it would be necessary that the most let's call it an intelligence. Not that intelligence is simply correlated with brain size, but let's talk about intelligence. In order for that to evolve, it's necessary that the most intelligent beings have individuals have the most children. So intelligence may buy you money, it may buy you worldly success, it may buy you a nice house and a nice car and things like that if you have a successful career. It may buy you the admiration of your fellow people, but it doesn't increase the number of offspring that you have. It doesn't increase your genetic legacy to the next generation. On the other hand, artificial intelligence, computers and technology generally is evolving by a non-genetic means, by leaps and bounds, of course.
And so what do you think, I don't know if you're familiar, there's a company called Neuralink, but there's a general effort of brain-computer interfaces, which is to try to build a connection between the computer and the brain, to send signals both directions. And the long-term dream there is to do exactly that, which is expand the size of the brain, expand the capabilities of the brain. Do you see this as interesting? Do you see this as a promising possible technology, or is the interface between the computer and the brain, like the brain is this wet, messy thing that's just impossible to interface with?
Well, of course it's interesting. Whether it's promising, I'm really not qualified to say. What I do find puzzling is that the brain being as small as it is compared to a computer and the individual components being as slow as they are compared to our electronic components, it is astonishing what it can do. I mean, imagine building a computer that fits into the size of a human skull, and with the equivalent of transistors or integrated circuits which work as slowly as neurons do. There's something mysterious about that. Something must be going on that we don't understand.
So I've just talked to Roger Penrose. I'm not sure if you're familiar with,
yes.
with his work, and he also describes this kind of mystery in the mind, in the brain, that so he's a materialist. So there's no sort of mystical thing going on, but there's so much about the material of the brain that we don't understand. That might be quantum mechanical in nature and so on. So there the ideas about consciousness. Do you ever think about ideas of consciousness, or a little bit more about the mystery of intelligence and consciousness that seems to pop up, just like you're saying, from our brain?
I agree with Roger Penrose that there is a mystery there. I mean, he's one of the world's greatest physicists, and I can't possibly argue with his...
But nobody knows anything about consciousness, and in fact, if we talk about religion and so on, the mystery of consciousness is so awe-inspiring, and we know so little about it that the leap to sort of religious or mystical explanations is too easy to make.
I think that it's just an act of cowardice to leap to religious explanations, and Schotter doesn't do that, of course. Right. But I accept that there may be something that we don't understand about it.
So, correct me if I'm wrong, but in your book, Selfish Gene, the gene-centered view of evolution allows us to think of the physical organism.
And that's what a lot of great minds think about, yo. Consciousness, yo. It's the ultimate question. Like you said, this is fucking sack of bones and some flesh and some blood vessels and shit. And this motherfucker get up and walk around and talk, and I don't know. The consciousness is the last great unknown. Something that I've always thought about, even as a kid, like, I think, therefore I am. And it's like, why the fuck do we think? Like, what causes people to think? What is the consciousness? Shit can't be answered, really. It's just the side effect of a functioning brain, yo. If a brain is functioning properly, it produces what we call the conscious, an individual viewpoint for the body to assess itself.
That's just the medium through which the software of our genetics and the ideas sort of propagate. So maybe can we start just with the basics? What in this context does the word meme mean?
It would mean the cultural equivalent of a gene, cultural equivalent in the sense of that which plays the same role as the gene in the transmission of culture, in the transmission of ideas in the broadest sense. And it's only a useful word if there's something Darwinian going on. Obviously, culture is transmitted, but is there anything Darwinian going on? And if there is, that means there has to be something like a gene, which becomes more numerous or less numerous in the population.
So it can replicate?
It can replicate. Well, it clearly does replicate. There's no question about that. The question is, does it replicate in a sort of differential way, in a Darwinian fashion? Could you say that certain ideas propagate because they're successful in the meme pool? In a sort of trivial sense, you can. Would you wish to say, though, that in the same way as an animal body is modified, adapted to serve as a machine for propagating genes, is it also a machine for propagating memes? Could you actually say that something about the way a human is modified, adapted for the function of meme propagation?
That's such a fascinating possibility, if that's true. If that it's not just about the genes, which seems somehow more comprehensible as these things of biology. The idea that culture, or maybe ideas, you can really broadly define it.
Yes.
Operates under these mechanisms.
Even morphology, even anatomy. it does evolve by mimetic means. I mean, things like hairstyles, styles of makeup, circumcision. These things are actual changes in the body form.
Yes.
Which are non-genetic and which get passed on from generation to generation, or sideways like a virus, yes. In a quasi-genetic way.
But the moment you start drifting away from the physical, it becomes interesting, because the space of ideas, ideologies, political systems.
Of course, yes.
So what's your sense? Are memes a metaphor more, or are they really? Is there something fundamental, almost physical presence of memes?
Well, I think they're a bit more than a metaphor, and I think that, and I mentioned that physical bodily characteristics, which are a bit trivial in a way, but with things like the propagation of religious ideas, both longitudinally down generations and transversely, as in a sort of epidemiology of ideas, when a charismatic preacher converts people, that resembles viral transmission, whereas the longitudinal transmission from grandparent to parent to child, etc., is more like conventional genetic transmission.
That's such a beautiful, especially in the modern day idea. Do you think about this implication in social networks, where the propagation of ideas, the viral propagation of ideas, and hence the new use of the word meme to describe?
Well, the internet, of course, provides extremely rapid method of transmission. And before, when I first coined the word, the internet didn't exist, and so that I was thinking then in terms of books, newspapers, broader radio, television, that kind of thing. Now, an idea can just leap around the world in all directions instantly. And so the internet provides a step change in the facility of propagation of memes.
How does that make you feel? Isn't it fascinating that sort of ideas, it's like you have Galapagos Islands or something, it's the 70s, and the internet allowed all these species to just like globalize. And in a matter of seconds, you could spread a message to millions of people. And these ideas, these memes can breed, can evolve, can mutate. And there's a selection, and there's like different, I guess, groups that evolve. Like there's a dynamics that's fascinating here. Do you think?
Yes.
Basically, do you think your work in this direction, while fundamentally was focused on life on Earth, do you think it should continue?
Yes, I do think it would probably be a good idea to think in a Darwinian way about this sort of thing. We could mentionally think of the transmission of ideas from in evolutionary context as being limited to, in our ancestors, people living in villages, living in small bands where everybody knew each other and ideas could propagate within the village, and they might hop to a neighboring village. Mm-hmm. Occasionally, and maybe even to a neighboring continent eventually. And that was a slow process. Nowadays, villages are international. I mean, you have people, it's been called echo chambers, where people are in a sort of internet village, where the other members of the village may be geographically distributed all over the world, but they just happen to be interested in the same things, use the same terminology, the same jargon, have the same enthusiasm. So people like the Flat Earth Society, they don't all live in one place. They find each other and they talk the same language to each other. They talk the same nonsense to each other. But so this is a kind of distributed version of the primitive idea of people living in villages and propagating their ideas in a local way.
Is there Darwinist parallel here? So is there evolutionary purpose of villages, or is that just a?
Well, I wouldn't use a word like evolutionary purpose in that case, but villages would be something that just people happen to live.
And in just the same kind of way, the Flat Earth societies of ideas emerge in the same kind of way in this digital space.
Yes.
Is there something interesting to say about I guess, from a perspective of Darwin, could we fully interpret the dynamics of social interaction in these social networks, or some much more complicated thing need to be developed? Like, what's your sense?
Well, a Darwinian selection idea would involve investigating which ideas spread and which don't. So, some ideas don't have the ability to spread. I mean, flat earthism is there are a few people believe in it, but it's not going to spread because it's obvious nonsense. But other ideas, even if they are wrong, can spread because they are attractive in some sense.
So the spreading and the selection in the Darwinian context is it just has to be attractive in some sense. Like, we don't have to define, like, it doesn't have to be attractive in the way that animals attract each other. It could be attractive in some other way.
Yes, all that matters is all that is needed is that it should spread, and it doesn't have to be true to spread. In truth is one criterion which might help an idea to spread, but there are other criteria which might help it to spread. As you say, attraction in animals is not necessarily valuable for survival. The famous peacock's tail doesn't help the peacock to survive, it helps it to pass on its genes. Similarly, an idea which is actually rubbish, but which people don't know is rubbish and think is very attractive, will spread in the same way as a peacock's genes spread.
It's a small sidestep. I remember reading somewhere, I think recently, that in some species of birds, sort of the idea that beauty may have its own purpose, and the idea that some birds, I'm being ineloquent here, but there's some aspects of their feathers and so on that serve no evolutionary purpose whatsoever. There's somebody making an argument that there are some things about beauty that animals do that may be its own purpose. Does that ring a bell for you? Does that sound ridiculous?
I think it's a rather distorted bell. Darwin, when he coined the phrase sexual selection,
yes,
didn't feel the need to suggest that what was attractive to females, usually is males attracting females, that what females found attractive had to be useful. He said it didn't have to be useful. It was enough that females found it attractive. And so it could be completely useless, probably was completely useless in the conventional sense, but was not at all useless in the sense of passing on, John Darwin didn't call them genes, but in the sense of reproducing. Others, starting with Wallace, the co-discoverer of natural selection, didn't like that idea, and they wanted sexually selected characteristics like peacock's tails to be in some sense useful. It's a bit of a stretch to think of a peacock's tail as being useful, but in a sense of survival, but others have run with that idea and have brought it up to date. And so there are two schools of thought on sexual selection which are still active and about equally supported now. Those who follow Darwin in thinking that it's just enough to say it's attractive, and those who follow Wallace and say that it has to be in some sense useful.
Do you fall into one category or the other?
No, I'm open-minded. I think they both could be correct in different cases.
Oh.
I mean, they've both been made sophisticated in a mathematical sense, right. more so than when Darwin and Wallace first started talking about it.
I'm Russian. I romanticize things, so I prefer the former.
Yes.
Where the beauty in itself is a powerful, so the attraction is a powerful force in evolution. On religion, do you think there will ever be a time in our future where almost nobody believes in God? Or God is not a part of the moral fabric of our society?
Nope.
Yes, I do. I think it may happen after a very long time. I think it may take a long time for that to happen.
So do you think ultimately for everybody on earth, religion, the other forms of doctrines, ideas could do a better job than what religion does?
Yes. I mean, following truth and reason.
Well, truth is a funny word. And reason too. It's a difficult idea now with truth on the internet, right, and fake news and so on. I suppose when you say reason, you mean the very basic sort of inarguable conclusions of science versus which political system is better.
Yes. I mean truth about the real world, which is ascertainable by not just by the more rigorous methods of science, but by just ordinary sensory observation.
So do you think there will ever be a time when we move past it? Like, I guess another way to ask it, are we hopelessly, fundamentally tied to religion in the way our society functions?
Well, clearly all individuals are not hopelessly tied to it, because many individuals don't believe. You could mean something like society needs religion in order to function properly, something like that, and some people have suggested that.
What's your intuition on that?
Well, I've read books on it, and they're persuasive. I don't think they're that persuasive, though. I mean, some people suggested that society needs a sort of figurehead, which can be a non-existent figurehead, in order to function properly. I think there's something rather patronizing about the idea that, well, you and I are intelligent enough not to believe in God, but the plebs need it, sort of thing. I mean, I think that's patronizing, and I'd like to think that was not the right way to proceed.
But at the individual level, do you think there's some value of spirituality? Sort of, if I think sort of as a scientist, the amount of things we actually know about our universe is a tiny, tiny, tiny percentage of what we could possibly know. So just from everything, even the certainty we have about the laws of physics, it seems to be that there's yet a huge amount to discover. And therefore we're sitting where 99.999% of things is just still shrouded in mystery. Do you think there's a role in a kind of spiritual view of that, sort of a humbled spiritual view?
I think it's right to be humble. I think it's right to admit that there's a lot we don't know, a lot that we don't understand, a lot that we still need to work on. Yeah. We're working on it. What I don't think is that it helps to invoke supernatural explanations. If our current scientific explanations aren't adequate to do the job, then we need better ones. We need to work more. And of course, the history of science shows just that as science goes on, problems get solved one after another, and the science advances as science gets better. But to invoke a non-scientific, non-physical explanation is simply to lie down in a cowardly way and say, we can't solve it, so we're going to invoke magic. Let's do that. Let's say we need better science, we need more science. It may be that the science will never do it. It may be that we will never actually understand everything. And that's okay, but let's keep working on it.
A challenging question there is, do you think science can lead us astray in terms of the humbleness? So there's some aspect of science, maybe it's the aspect of scientist and not science, but of sort of a mix of ego and confidence that can lead us astray in terms of discovering some of the big open questions about the universe.
I think that's right. I mean, there are arrogant people in any walk of life, and scientists are no exception to that. And so there are arrogant scientists who think we've solved everything. Of course, we haven't. So humility is a proper stance for a scientist. I mean, it's a proper working stance because it encourages further work. But in a way, to resort to a supernatural explanation is a kind of arrogance, because it's saying, well, we don't understand it scientifically, therefore the non-scientific religious supernatural explanation must be the right one. That's arrogant. What is humble is to say we don't know, and we need to work further on it.
So maybe if I could psychoanalyze you for a second, you have at times been just slightly frustrated with people who have have a supernatural. Has that changed over the years? Have you become how do people that kind of have seek supernatural explanations? How do you see those people as human beings? Do you see them as dishonest? Do you see them as sort of ignorant? Do you see them as, I don't know. Is it like what?
No, I mean,
how do you think of?
Certainly not dishonest, and I mean, obviously many of them are perfectly nice people, so I don't sort of despise them in that sense. I think it's often a misunderstanding that people will jump from the admission that we don't understand something. They will jump straight to what they think of as an alternative explanation, which is the supernatural one, which is not an alternative. It's a non-explanation. Instead of jumping to the conclusion that science needs more work, that we need to actually do some better science. So I don't have, personal antipathy towards such people. I just think they're misguided.
So what about this really interesting space that I have trouble with? So religion I have a better grasp on, but there's large communities, like you said, Flat Earth community, that I've recently, because I've made a few jokes about it, I saw that I've noticed that there's people that take it quite seriously. So there's this bigger world of conspiracy theorists, which is a kind of, there's elements of it that are religious as well, but I think they're also scientific. So the basic credo of a conspiracy theorist is to question everything, which is also the credo of a good scientist, I would say. So what do you make of this?
Yes. I think it's probably too easy to say that by labeling something conspiracy, you therefore dismiss it. Occasionally conspiracies are right. And so we shouldn't dismiss conspiracy theories out of hand. We should examine them on their own merits. Flat Earthism is obvious nonsense. We don't have to examine that much further. But there may be other conspiracy theories which are actually right.
So I've grew up in the Soviet Union, so I understand, the space race was very influential for me on both sides of the coin. There's a conspiracy theory that we never went to the moon, right? And it's like I can understand it, and it's very difficult to rigorously scientifically show one way or the other. It's just you have to use some of the human intuition about who would have to lie, who would have to work together. And it's clear that very unlikely good people. Behind that is my general intuition that most people in this world are good. In order to really put together some conspiracy theories, there has to be a large number of people working together and essentially being dishonest.
Yes, which is improbable. The sheer number who would have to be in on this conspiracy, and the sheer detail, the attention to detail they'd have had, and so on. I'd also worry about the motive. Why would anyone want to suggest that it didn't happen? Why is it so hard to believe? The physics of it, the mathematics of it, the idea of computing orbits and trajectories and things, it all works mathematically. Well, why wouldn't you believe it?
It's a psychology question, because there's something really pleasant about pointing out that the emperor has no clothes when everybody, thinking outside the box and coming up with a true answer where everybody else is deluded. There's something. Yes. I have that for science, right? You want to prove the entire scientific community wrong. That's the whole.
No, that's right. And of course, historically, lone geniuses have come out right sometimes.
Yes.
But often people who think they're a lone genius much more often turn out not to. So you have to judge each case on its merits. The mere fact that you're a maverick, the mere fact that you're going against the current tide doesn't make you right. You've got to show you're right by looking at the evidence.
So because you focus so much on religion and disassembled a lot of ideas there, and I was wondering if you have ideas about conspiracy theory groups, because it's such a prevalent, even reaching into presidential politics and so on. It seems like it's a very large communities that believe different kinds of conspiracy theories. Is there some connection there to your thinking on religion?
It is curious. It's an obviously difficult thing. I don't understand why people believe things that are clearly nonsense, like, Flat Earth, and also the conspiracy about not landing on the moon, or that the United States engineered 9/11, that kind of thing.
I believe that. Richard Dawkins.
Clearly not.
Mr. Richard Dawkins. I like you a lot, bro. I agree with a lot of this shit you say, because you're a fucking smart ass guy, yo. But I do believe that 9/11 was an inside job. And the fucking the military industrial complex definitely planned, orchestrated, organized, and carried out the terrorist attacks on that day and blamed it on some fucking radical Islamic jihadists, when in fact, damn, Richard, bro, like if you just look into that shit, I mean, a lot of the evidence is washed away now. It was buried the day of, but this shit is almost 20 years old now, so most of the information is gone. A lot of the first eyewitness responders and first-hand accounts, all these people are dead. In just 20 years, yo, so many people died, yo. People were speaking out about that shit from all kind of medical ailments and mysterious accidents and all kind of shit, yo. Man, that 9/11 incident really pushed me hard for my conspiracy research. I wanted to try to find out everything after that shit. Like, wait a minute, that shit ain't happened like the government said it happened? What do you mean? The guy on the news told me they had box cutters. There were no box cutters. There were no hijackers. No plane hit the Pentagon. Wait, whoa. The government said a plane hit the Pentagon. There was no reason for Building 7 to collapse. What do you mean? No reason. Who are you to say there were? Oh, you're an engineer. Oh, you help build buildings? I guess you would know then. But Mr. Dawkins says, oh no, that's a conspiracy theory. Sorry, Richard, it's not. It really isn't. This shit really isn't. It's a conspiracy, yes. Theory, no. It's an actual conspiracy that has mountains of evidence. I'm talking about evidence coming out the Wuha. All the way out the wazoo. That's why both of my vehicles have bumper stickers on it that say, you guessed it, 9/11 was an inside job. Damn, Mr. Dawkins, I never heard you say that before. Slightly disappointed, not surprised at all. Most people don't think that 9/11 was a planned attack from Central Intelligence Agencies and shit like that, man. Oh, but it was. Believe you me.
It's extremely unlikely.
Okay, it's extremely unlikely.
Yes.
Religion is a bit different because it's passed down from generation to generation. So many of the people who are religious got it from their parents, who got it from their parents, got it from their parents.
It's a tradition.
Childhood indoctrination is a very powerful
Yes, it is.
But these things like the 9/11 conspiracy theory, the Kennedy assassination conspiracy theory, the man on the moon conspiracy theory, these are not childhood indoctrination. These are presumably dreamed up by somebody who then tells somebody else, who then wants to believe it. And I don't know why people are so eager to fall in line with some person that they happen to read or meet who spins some yarn. I can kind of understand why they believe what their parents and teachers told them when they were very tiny and not capable of critical thinking for themselves. So I sort of get why the great religions of the world, like Catholicism and Islam, go on persisting. It's because of childhood indoctrination. But that's not true of flat earthism. And sure enough, flat earthism is a very minority cult.
Way larger than I ever realized.
Well, yes, I know.
But so that's a really clean idea. You've articulated that in your new book, and the Outgrowing God, and in God Delusion is the early indoctrination. That's really interesting. You can get away with a lot of out there ideas in terms of religious texts if the age at which you convey those ideas at first is a young age. So indoctrination is sort of an essential element of propagation of religion. So let me ask, on the morality side, in the books that I mentioned, God Delusion and Outgrowing God, you described that human beings don't need religion to be moral. So from an engineering perspective, we want to engineer morality into AI systems. So in general, where do you think morals come from in humans?
A very complicated and interesting question. It's clear to me that the moral standards, the moral values of our civilization changes as the decades go by, certainly as the centuries go by, even as the decades go by. And we in the 21st century are quite clearly labeled 21st century people in terms of our moral values. There's a spread. I mean, some of us are a little bit more ruthless, some of us more conservative, some of us more liberal and so on. But we all subscribe to pretty much the same views when you compare us with, say, 18th century, 17th century people, even 19th century, 20th century people. So we're much less racist, we're much less sexist and so on than we used to be. Some people are still racist and some are still sexist, but the spread has shifted. The Gaussian distribution has moved and moves steadily as the centuries go by. And that is the most powerful influence I can see on our moral values. And that doesn't have anything to do with religion. I mean, the religion of the morals of the Old Testament are Bronze Age models. They're deplorable, and they are to be understood in terms of the people in the desert who made them up at the time. And so human sacrifice, an eye for an eye and a tooth for a tooth, petty revenge, killing people for breaking the Sabbath, all that kind of thing, inconceivable now.
So at some point, religious texts may have in part reflected that Gaussian distribution at that time.
I'm sure they did. I'm sure they always reflect that, yes.
And then now, but the sort of almost like the meme, as you describe it, of ideas moves much faster than religious texts do, the new religious.
Yes, so basing your morals on religious texts, which were written millennia ago, is not a great way to proceed. I think that's pretty clear. So not only should we not get our morals from such texts, but we don't. We quite clearly don't. If we did, then we'd be discriminating against women, and we'd be racist. We'd be killing homosexuals and so on. So we don't, and we shouldn't. Now, of course, it's possible to use your 21st century standards of morality, and you can look at the Bible and you can cherry pick particular verses which conform to our modern morality, and you'll find that Jesus says some pretty nice things, which is great. But you're using your 21st century morality to decide which verses to pick, which verses to reject. And so why not cut out the middleman of the Bible and go straight to the 21st century morality, which is, where that comes from is a much more complicated question. Why is it that morality moral values change as the centuries go by. They undoubtedly do. And it's a very interesting question to ask why. It's another example of cultural evolution. Just as technology progresses, so moral values progress for probably very different reasons.
But it's interesting if the direction in which that progress is happening has some evolutionary value, or if it's merely a drift that can go into any direction.
I'm not sure it's any direction, and I'm not sure it's evolutionarily valuable. What it is progressive in the sense that each step is a step in the same direction as the previous step. So it becomes more gentle, more decent, as by modern standards, more liberal, less violent.
See, but more decent, I think you're using terms and interpreting everything in the context of the 21st century.
Yeah.
Because Genghis Khan would probably say that this is not more decent because we're now, there's a lot of weak members of society,
Exactly.
So we're not murdering.
Yes, and I was careful to say by the standards of the 21st century.
Yeah.
By our standards, if we, with hindsight, look back at history, what we see is a trend in the direction towards us, towards our present.
Right.
Our present values.
So for us, we see progress, but it's an open question whether that won't, I don't see necessarily why we can never return to Genghis Khan times.
Well, we could. I suspect we won't. But if you look at the history of moral values over the centuries, it is in a progressive. I use the word progressive not in a value judgment sense, in the sense of a transitive sense. Each step is the same direction as the previous step. So things like we don't derive entertainment from torturing cats. We don't derive entertainment from like the Romans did in the Colosseum from state.
Or rather, we suppress the desire to get. To have play. It's probably in us somewhere. So there's a bunch of parts of our brain. One that probably, limbic system that wants certain pleasures, and that's.
I wouldn't have said that, but you're at liberty to think that if you like.
Well, there's a Dan Carlin of Hardcore History. There's a really nice explanation of how we've enjoyed watching the torture of people, the fighting of people, just the torture, the suffering of people throughout history as entertainment, until quite recently, and now everything we do with sports. We're kind of channeling that feeling into something else. So, there's some dark aspects of human nature that are underneath everything, and I do hope this higher level software we've built will keep us at bay.
Yes.
I'm also Jewish and have history with the Soviet Union and the Holocaust, and I clearly remember that some of the darker aspects of human nature.
They do. There have been steps backwards, admittedly, and the Holocaust is an obvious one. But if you take a broad view of history, it's the same direction.
So Pamela McCordick, in Machines Who Think, has written that AI began with an ancient wish to forge the gods. Do you see? It's a poetic description, I suppose. But do you see a connection between our civilizations? Historic desire to create gods, to create religions, and our modern desire to create technology and intelligent technology?
I suppose there's a link between an ancient desire to explain away mystery and science, but intelligence.
Name one thing that's not a conspiracy these days. That's the fucking truth.
I read somewhere a somewhat facetious paper which said that we have a new god. It's called Google, and we pray to it and we worship it and we ask its advice like an oracle and so on. That's fun.
But you don't see that. You see that as a fun statement, a facetious statement. You don't see that as a kind of truth of us creating things that are more powerful than ourselves and natural.
It has a kind of poetic resonance to it, which I get.
But
I wouldn't.
But not.
I wouldn't have bothered to make the point myself. Put it that way.
All right. So you don't think AI will become our new religion, a new gods like Google?
Well, yes. I can see that the future of intelligent machines, or indeed intelligent aliens from outer space, might yield beings that we would regard as gods, in the sense that they are so superior to us that we might as well worship them. That's highly plausible, I think. But I see a very fundamental distinction between a God who is simply defined as something very, very powerful and intelligent on the one hand, and a God who doesn't need explaining by a progressive step-by-step process like evolution or like engineering design. So the difference. So suppose we did meet an alien from outer space who was marvelously, magnificently more intelligent than us, and we would sort of worship it for that reason. Nevertheless, it would not be a God in the very important sense that it did not just happen to be there like God is supposed to. It must have come about by a gradual, step-by-step, incremental, progressive process, presumably like Darwinian evolution. So there's all the difference in the world between those two. Intelligence, design, comes into the universe late as a product of a progressive evolutionary process or a progressive engineering design process.
So most of the work is done through this slow-moving progress.
Exactly.
Yeah. But there's still this desire to get answers to the why question. That if the world is a simulation, if we're living in a simulation, that there's a programmer like creature that we can ask questions of.
Let's pursue the idea that we're living in a simulation, which is not totally ridiculous, by the way.
There we go.
Then you still need to explain the programmer. The programmer had to come into existence by even if we're in a simulation, the programmer must have evolved. Or if he's in a sort of if she's in a meta simulation, then the meta programmer must have evolved by a gradual process. You can't escape that. Fundamentally, you've got to come back to a gradual incremental process of explanation to start with.
There's no shortcuts in this world.
No, exactly.
But maybe to linger on that point about the simulation, do you think it's an interesting, basically talk to bored the heck out of everybody asking this question, but whether you live in a simulation, do you think we live in a simulation? Second, do you think it's an interesting thought experiment?
It's certainly an interesting thought experiment. I first met it in a science fiction novel by Daniel Galloy called Counterfeit World, in which it's all about, our heroes are running a gigantic computer which simulates the world, and something goes wrong, and so one of them has to go down into the simulated world in order to fix it. And then the denouement of the thing, the climax of the novel, is that they discover that they themselves are in another simulation at a high level. So I was intrigued by this, and I love others of Daniel Galloy's science fiction novels.
A dream within the dream.
It was revived seriously by Nick Bostrom.
Bostrom, talking to him in an hour.
Okay. He goes further, not just treat it as a science fiction speculation. He actually thinks it's positively likely.
Yes.
He thinks it's very likely, actually.
Well, he makes like a probabilistic argument, which you can use to come up with very interesting conclusions about the nature of this universe.
He thinks that we're in a simulation done by, so to speak, our descendants of the future. The products, but it's still a product of evolution. It's still ultimately going to be a product of evolution, even though the super intelligent people of the future have created our world, and you and I are just a simulation, and this table is a simulation, and so on. I don't actually, in my heart of hearts, believe it, but I like his argument.
Well, so the interesting thing is that I agree with you, but the interesting thing to me, if I would say, if we're living in a simulation, that in that simulation, to make it work, you still have to do everything gradually, just like you said. That even though it's programmed, I don't think there could be miracles. Otherwise,
no. The programmer, the upper ones, have to have evolved gradually. However, the simulation they create could be instantaneous. They could be switched on, and we come into the world with fabricated memories.
True, but what I'm trying to convey, so you're saying the broader statement, but I'm saying from an engineering perspective, both the programmer has to be slowly evolved and the simulation, because it's like from an engineering perspective.
Oh yeah, it takes a long time to write a program.
No, like just I don't think you can create the universe in a snap. I think you have to grow it.
Okay, well, that's a good point. That's an arguable point. By the way, I have thought about using the Nick Bostrom idea to solve the riddle of how we were talking earlier about why the human brain can achieve so much.
Mm-hmm.
I thought of this when my then 100-year-old mother was marveling at what I could do with a smartphone. Mm-hmm. And I could, look up anything in the encyclopedia. I could play her music that she liked and so on. She said, "Is it all in that tiny little phone?" No, it's out there. It's in the cloud. And maybe most of what we do is in a cloud. So maybe if we are a simulation, then all the power that we think is in our skull, it actually may be like the power that we think is in the iPhone. But is that actually out there?
It's an interface to something else.
Yes.
I mean, that's what people, including Roger Penrose with panpsychism, that consciousness is somehow a fundamental part of physics, that it doesn't have to actually all reside inside of the brain.
But Roger thinks it does reside in the skull, whereas I'm suggesting that it doesn't, that there's a cloud.
That'd be a fascinating notion. On a small tangent, are you familiar with the work of Donald Hoffman? I guess, maybe not saying his name correctly, but just forget the name. There's a difference between reality and perception. So, like, we biological organisms perceive the world in order for the natural selection process to be able to survive and so on. But that doesn't mean that our perception actually reflects the fundamental reality, the physical reality underneath.
Well, I do think that although it reflects the fundamental reality, I do believe there is a fundamental reality. I do think that our perception is constructive, in the sense that we construct in our minds a model of what we're seeing. And so this is really the view of people who work on visual illusions, like Richard Gregory, who point out that things like a Necker cube, which flip from a two-dimensional picture of a cube on a sheet of paper, but we see it as a three-dimensional cube, and it flips from one orientation to another at regular intervals. What's going on is that the brain is constructing a cube, but the sense data are compatible with two alternative cubes, and so rather than stick with one of them, it alternates between them. I think that's just a model for what we do all the time when we see a table, when we see a person, when we see anything. We're using the sense data to construct or make use of a perhaps previously constructed model. I noticed this when I meet somebody who actually is, say, a friend of mine, but until I kind of realize that it is him, he looks different, and then when I finally clock that it's him, his features switch like a Necker cube into the familiar form. As it were, I've taken his face out of the filing cabinet inside and grafted it onto, or used the sense data to invoke it.
Yeah, we do some kind of miraculous compression on this whole thing to be able to filter out most of the sense data and make sense of it. That's just a magical thing that we do. So you've written many amazing books, but let me ask, what books, technical or fiction or philosophical, had a big impact on your own life? What books would you recommend people consider reading in their own intellectual journey?
Darwin, of course, and
the original. I'm actually ashamed to say I've never read Darwin.
He's astonishingly prescient, because considering he was writing in the middle of the 19th century, Michael Gieselin said he's working 100 years ahead of his time. Everything except genetics is amazingly right and amazingly far ahead of his time. And And of course, you need to read the updatings that have happened since his time as well. I mean, he would be astonished by, well, let alone Watson and Crick, of course, but he'd be astonished by Mendelian genetics as well.
Yeah, it'd be fascinating to see what he thought about DNA, what he would think about DNA.
I mean, yes, it would, because in many ways it clears up what appeared in his time to be a riddle. The digital nature of genetics clears up what was a problem, what was a big problem. Gosh, there's so much that I could think of. I can't really.
Is there something outside, sort of more fiction? Is there when you think Jung, was there books that just kind of outside of kind of the realm of science,
yes,
and religion, that just kind of sparked your?
Yes, well, actually, I suppose I could say that I've learned some science from science fiction. I mentioned Daniel Galloy, and that's one example, but another of his novels called Dark Universe, which is not terribly well known, but it's a very, very nice science fiction story. It's about a world of perpetual darkness. And we're not told at the beginning of the book why these people are in darkness. They stumble around in some kind of underground world of caverns and passages, using echolocation like bats and whales to get around, and they've adapted, presumably by Darwinian means, to survive in perpetual total darkness. But what's interesting is that their mythology, their religion, has echoes of Christianity, but it's based on light. And so there's been a fall from a paradise world that once existed where light reigned supreme. And because of the sin of mankind, light banished them. So they no longer are in light's presence, but light survives in the form of mythology and in the form of sayings like the great God Almighty, for light's sake, don't do that. And I hear what you mean rather than I see what you mean.
So some of the same religious elements are present in this other totally kind of absurd different form.
Yes. And so it's a wonderful, I wouldn't call it satire because it's too good-natured for that, and a wonderful parable about Christianity and the doctrine, the theological doctrine of the fall. So I find that kind of science fiction immensely stimulating. Fred Hoyle's The Black Cloud. Oh, by the way, anything by Arthur C. Clarke I find very, very wonderful too. Fred Hoyle's The Black Cloud, his first science fiction novel, where I learned a lot of science from that. It suffers from an obnoxious hero, unfortunately, but apart from that, you learn a lot of science from it. Another of his novels, Ava Andromeda, which, by the way, the theme of that is taken up by Carl Sagan's science fiction novel, another wonderful writer, Carl Sagan Contact, where the idea is, again, we will not be visited from outer space by physical bodies. We will be visited, possibly, we might be visited by radio, but the radio signals could manipulate us and actually have a concrete influence on the world if they make us or persuade us to build a computer which runs their software. So that they can then transmit their software by radio, and then the computer takes over the world. And this is the same theme in both Hoyle's book and Sagan's book. I presume I don't know whether Sagan knew about Hoyle's book. Probably did. But it's a clever idea that we will never be invaded by physical bodies. The War of the Worlds of H.G. Wells will never happen. But we could be invaded by radio signals, coded information, which is sort of like DNA. We are, I call them, we are survival machines of our DNA. So it has great resonance for me, because I think of us, I think of bodies, physical bodies, biological bodies, as being manipulated by coded information, DNA, which has come down through generations.
And in the space of memes, it doesn't have to be physical; it can be transmitted through the space of information.
Step, yes.
That's a fascinating possibility that from outer space we can be infiltrated by other memes, by other ideas,
yes,
and thereby controlled in that way. Let me ask the silliest, or maybe the most important question. What is the meaning of life? What gives your life fulfillment, purpose, happiness, meaning?
From a scientific point of view, the meaning of life is the propagation of DNA, but that's not what I feel. That's not the meaning of my life. So the meaning of my life is something which is probably different from yours and different from other people's, but we each make our own meaning. So we set up goals we want to achieve. We want to write a book. We want to do whatever it is we do, write a quartet. We want to win a football match. And these are short-term goals, well, maybe even quite long-term goals, which are set up by our brains, which have goal-seeking machinery built into them. But what we don't feel motivated by the desire to pass on our DNA, mostly. We have other goals, which can be very moving, very important. They could even be called spiritual in some cases. We want to understand the riddle of the universe. We want to understand consciousness. We want to understand how the brain works. These are all noble goals. Some of them can be noble goals anyway. And they are a far cry from the fundamental biological goal, which is the propagation of DNA. But the machinery that enables us to set up these higher level goals is originally programmed into us by natural selection of DNA.
The propagation of DNA, but what do you make of this unfortunate fact that we are mortal? Do you ponder your immortality? Does it make you sad? Does it?
I ponder it. It makes me sad that I shall have to leave and not see what's going to happen next. If there's something frightening about mortality, apart from sort of missing, as I've said, something more deeply, darkly frightening, it's the idea of eternity. But eternity is only frightening if you're there. Eternity before we were born, billions of years before we were born, and we were effectively dead before we were born. As I think it was Mark Twain said, I was dead for billions of years before I was born and never suffered the smallest inconvenience. And that's how it's going to be after we leave. So I think of it as really, eternity is a frightening prospect. And so the best way to spend it is under a general anesthetic, which is what it'll be.
Beautifully put. Richard, it was a huge honor to meet you, to talk to you. Thank you so much for your time.
Thank you very much.
Thanks for listening to this conversation with Richard Dawkins, and thank you to our presenting sponsor, Cash App. Please consider supporting the podcast by downloading Cash App and using code LEXPODCAST. If you enjoy this podcast, subscribe on YouTube, review with 5 stars on Apple Podcasts, support it on Patreon, or simply connect with me on Twitter at Lex Friedman. And now, let me leave you with some words of wisdom from Richard Dawkins. We are going to die, and that makes us the lucky ones. Most people are never going to die because they're never going to be born. The potential people who could have been here in my place, but who will in fact never see the light of day, outnumber the sand grains of Arabia. Certainly, those unborn ghosts include greater poets than Keats, scientists greater than Newton. We know this because the set of possible people allowed by our DNA so massively exceeds the set of actual people. In the teeth of these stupefying odds, it is you and I, in our ordinariness, that are here. We privileged few who won the lottery of birth against all odds. How dare we whine at our inevitable return to that prior state from which the vast majority have never stirred. Thank you for listening, and hope to see you next time.
I think that was a pretty good conversation.
Following is a conversation with Roger Penrose, physicist, mathematician, and philosopher at the University of Oxford. He has made fundamental contributions in many disciplines from the mathematical physics of general relativity and cosmology to the limitations of a computational view of consciousness. In his book, The Emperor's New Mind, Roger writes that, quote, children are not afraid to pose basic questions that may embarrass us as adults to ask. It may
Alright, guys. I'm about to get out of here. I don't know if I'll stream this painting for the next few sessions. I'll probably just be in here by myself. These books are going to be pretty boring. I might do like a 30-40 minute commentary or some stuff like that, but I don't think anybody's going to be real interested in watching me paint these books. But appreciate y'all guys chilling with me. Catch you next time. Peace.